So our speaker is the world famous Gary O'Neill, recruiting and hiring consultant with his company, Hire Factors. The name of his presentation is Craft Your Compelling Career Story. So tell me a little bit about yourself. That's what he's going to explain and tell you how to do. Gary is a recruiting and hiring consultant. He has led high performance recruiting teams in both an agency and corporate environments, has over 20 years of experience in the recruitment field. He's been close to over 15,000 hires. He gets credit for a lot. His industry background is vast and includes software, IT, e-commerce, banking, the public sector, semiconductors, engineering, manufacturing, sales, marketing, and environmental companies. His experience spans all levels, including C-level executives, senior managers, technical leadership, high-performance professionals, as well as support staff and laborers. He will take you behind the scenes, show you the most effective and practical steps so you too can take control of your job search. Gary O'Neill.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
We're
No
excited.
wonder, after you're reading all that, no wonder I feel tired all the time, right? Just saying. I don't really. I just was trying to be funny. Hey, I'm trying to share my screen. Can y'all see my screen? It should say "Craft Your Compelling Story." Does that show up for you?
Yes, we do see it.
Okay. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I still, just to add to that introduction, I mean, I've been leading recruiting teams and doing consulting and employment consulting and all kinds of things for a long time, but I still recruit every single day. I reach out to people, I conduct interviews. I've probably done 15 interviews this week. I work with hiring managers. So, I mean, I've been actively involved in this stuff for quite some time. And so I've got a little bit of something different to talk about today, which is, crafting your compelling story, because I was thinking about, the individuals who I've spoken with recently and some of the things that I would suggest that they really do to get clear and to do a better job in terms of moving things forward. So one of the things that just stands out for me is how few people are really great at telling a compelling story about themselves and about their career. So I thought maybe we would, spend our time focusing on that today. So I want to tell you a story. And this is one, if you've been in some of my stuff, you may have heard it before, but it's one of my favorites in this regard. It happened, 4 or 5 years ago at this point, I guess. But there was an individual who I was working with a company, and my team was actually handling all of their recruiting, including people who had applied online. And this gentleman had and this company was in the medical software space. And just double checking, you can hear me, right?
Yes, just fine.
Yes, you're
Okay.
fine.
Okay, good. I just had this weird sense as I was just talking to myself. So this company was in the medical software space, and they were adding people to their software QA team for the front end, the user interface, and specifically the part of the user interface that has to do with pharmacies and ordering pharmaceuticals and dispensing pharmaceuticals to patients. This software was used by hospitals and large nursing facilities. And they needed to add someone to their QA team. One of the individuals who had applied for the job had started their career in the military, had gotten into what's called TIG welding, which apparently is really fine, very precise types of welding, had gone into aircraft mechanics and did a lot of that kind of welding and some of the finer tuning on fighter aircraft. And once they had gotten out of the military, they had gone into manufacturing a lot of those same components that they had worked on these fighter aircraft, and doing the QA on them, testing the welds, testing the torque on bolts, essentially day in and day out, recurring work, repetitive work to do the quality assurance testing on a wide variety of components that were going into fighter aircraft, helicopters, and a variety of other things. So this individual had applied for this software QA job. So I'd reached out to them and had a conversation. By the way, if you're ever in the mode of being a recruiter or a hiring manager, one of the things I'd really love for you to know is that you can tell very little from a resume. In particular, the things that make someone great who they are as a person, what their root motivations are, their core drivers, why they care about things, why they're going to align with your organization. Those kinds of things you'll never see on a piece of paper. So I tend to err on the side of talking to people. So I had a conversation with this individual, and not only were they just, their energy was just phenomenal, it became very clear that this individual was able to go to work for years doing essentially the same tasks day in, day out, filling in all kinds of detailed government paperwork, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and had 0 times had any of his paperwork rejected or any of his tests invalidated, right? And so, I'd presented him over the hiring manager, who paid no attention to the notes that I sent over to him and did nothing but looked at the resume, and eventually essentially just shot it right back at me and says, "Hey, what is it that somebody's in mechanical kinds of stuff and doing inspecting welds?" Because their resume was full of details about TIG welding and about the inspection tools that they were using and the x-rays and the torques and all the details of what it is that they do, which is most resumes are full of those kinds of things, which are essentially a list of tasks that people perform. So we could have another conversation about how to make a much better resume. If you just find that your resume is full of a bunch of tasks and activities you perform, you probably want to revisit that. But my point really is that what I did was I shot back over to the hiring manager, picked up the phone and called him and said, "Hey, we need to talk, right? Here's what we're talking about. Not only is this person sharp, but they're able to day in and day out stay focused on repetitive tasks, really care about what the work that they're doing. They filled out complex forms. A lot of what they're doing is very complex software that drives all these kinds of things. And essentially, you'd be an idiot not to talk to this individual." So the hiring manager talks to the individual and says, "Oh my God, we have to hire this person." They joined the team. And, last I checked about a year and a half ago, they were one of the team leads in the rest. And so my point is that the individual in this particular case had done a very poor job of telling their compelling story and making their story align with the job that they were actually applying for. And it's not about me, but if it weren't for me stepping in and essentially being able to retell their story in a way that the hiring manager was able to say, "Oh, that makes sense," the company wouldn't have had the opportunity to work with and hire this individual. So that's the reason why I think this is so important, which is your ability to tell your compelling story. Some people call it an elevator pitch, right? I really hate that. But it's more about, your compelling story. So that's what we're here to talk about today. So here's the thing. Most hiring managers want to hire someone who looks like this, right? This is this nice green line. And if you look like this is really low risk, which is somewhere in the past you started doing this kind of work. You've had increasing levels of responsibility with regard to the same kinds of work. They're evaluating you today, and they can see this nice, straight, clean green line, and they're able to, and by the way, you may not realize it, and even sometimes people who are hiring don't realize, they're not necessarily hiring you for today. They're hiring you for their ability to project you as this star out here in the future. And so unless you're able to tell your own story in such a way that somebody can see, what's going on, it's very difficult for another person to be able to translate your story. To no fault of the hiring manager I was talking about before. I mean, it's not his job to do that. It's my job to do that. I've been doing it for a long time. And so I'm able to see the story. So I'm here to give you some suggestions on how to do this for yourself. Now, most of us, and if you looked at my career, mine looks like this. It's not this nice straight green line. I haven't always done exactly the same thing. I still don't. I think that's frighteningly boring. But a lot of us, our past looks like this, and we're going and we're applying for this job. And when someone tries to look at our past and connect those dots and project out in the future, we become this big red question mark, which is, I'm not sure. I don't think so. So by the way, at resume review and following interviews, I mean, there's really 3 choices, which is, when somebody looks at your resume or when somebody interviews you, following that, there's really 3 choices, which is most of the time it ends with somebody going, "Meh, I don't know," right? So question mark. Sometimes it ends in a splat, right? That happens too. But rarely does it turn out to be, there's really strong exclamation point, "Yes," right? And what I can tell you is that the yes often comes from somebody's ability to tell their compelling story in a way that enables somebody else to say, "Oh, that makes sense." So my point is that regardless of your background, it's your responsibility to weave the story so that when somebody's evaluating at this point, They can project your success in the future and see you as somebody who's going to make their life easier, going to make their team successful, going to be able to achieve the results that they need you to achieve, right? Does that make sense? We all good? What do you think? Questions, comments? Yeah. All right. So by the way, whoever's, Kathy, anybody else, if people have questions, comments or whatever, I'm not paying attention to those right now, but you know, please jump in there and let me know. So the idea essentially is to craft a story so that regardless of your background or what have you, that you align it in such a way that people are able to say, oh, that makes sense to me, and see you as somebody who can be successful in the future. I'm going to go back one slide for just a second and share with you that what we're going to do is I'm going to pick it up at this point right here. If you can see my cursor, we're going to pick it up at this point, and the compelling story that I'm talking about is the one that's grounded in today and is painting a picture of you into the future. That's particularly important for some of you who are considering a career transition or some kind of a career change. If you're not able to tell a compelling story about whatever career you're transitioning into, and you leave it to me as an exercise so that I can reassemble those fragmented pieces of your past into a story that's going to make you look compelling in terms of being successful in the future, one, that's too big of an ask, right? You're expecting an awful lot of me, both in terms, and I don't mean me specifically, I mean me in general. You're expecting a lot of someone if you think that they can take your past, assemble whatever you're telling me in terms of these maybe semi or unrelated things like welding to software QA. It's largely not going to happen. It's too big of an ask. And on top of that, there's likelihood that someone else is in line for that particular job who is going to be a better fit, more qualified, have more expertise, more experience, you know, all those kinds of things. Chances are there's somebody who's going to be like that. So that's the reason why your compelling story is so critically important. All right. So let's talk about how to do this. And here's what I think. So I really think that this first bullet point, which is you have to decide where you're going. I see far too many, and it's getting worse right now because of the coronavirus situation, unemployment, and the rest. But it's getting worse, which is people being very unclear of what job is right for them. I have people all the time these days telling me, well, I'm open to this, and I can do customer service or sales or pre-sales or other kinds of things, right? Oh, wrong answer, right? I mean, that's the wrong answer. So I'm not here to really beat on this particular horse, but we could have a whole conversation about this, which is, I'll make it really simple. I get paid because people get hired. I don't mean that to sound crude, but that's how I make my living, right? I get paid because people get hired. And if I had a set of 1,000 people who were very clear about what their next role is, regardless of whether they're in career transition or not, but they're very clear about what it is they're going to do. And then there was another set of 1,000 people who were all open to a variety of different possibilities. And I had to place my bet on one or the other in terms of which group of 1,000 people are going to get better jobs faster. It's really clear who the team that I'm betting on. The ones that have narrowed it down to one specific thing and they've made those decisions and they're targeting that and they're really clear. Because when you're really clear on where it is that you're going, you're interesting, you're attractive, you're compelling. When you're open to possibilities, you're leaving it up to me. You know, I mean, don't you hate it when you go somewhere and you pull into like a drive-through and you're going to say, hey, I'm going to go in and get something to drink. You want anything? And somebody says, oh yeah, just get me something. You know, like, don't leave it up to me. Like, what soda to get for you? I sure don't want to be left up to me as to what job's right for you. So as soon as people start telling me, well, I'm open to things, I'm kind of going, you know what, there are a bunch of people who aren't open to things. They're really clear about what it is they're doing. So step number one is really to decide where you're going, because it's very difficult to tell a compelling story about being open to things, right? So even if you're in career transition, pick a thing. Because if you execute an effective job search strategy, which is all about identifying the people who have the kinds of problems that you solve, the peers, the hiring managers, the others, and you reach out to those individuals and you execute a outreach campaign, you'll never saturate the marketplace with your ability to reach out to those people. If your primary job search strategy is applying for jobs online, yeah, you'll run out of room. And that's the reason why people are open, because if there's not enough jobs being posted for the things that you do, just know that most jobs are never posted, right? And the jobs that are posted are highly competitive. That's a whole nother conversation too. But to craft your compelling story, you first have to decide where you're going. Then you can craft your compelling story of the future. And then once you have your compelling story of the future, now you can take your past and you can align it with that future. So going back to the story that I told you earlier, this individual had already decided that they wanted to move out of the manufacturing world into the software world and into the technology world and into software product companies. I mean, they had gotten pretty clear about what it is that they wanted to do. It's just, and so that's the reason why they ended up applying for this software QA job. They had just never developed a compelling story that showed anybody why that makes any sense. So yeah, so if they had done that and gotten really crystal clear and been able to tell a compelling story about why being in software QA made sense, then they could have gone back in their past and aligned their past. And what they wouldn't have done is talk about TIG welding. They wouldn't have talked about X-ray inspection machines. They would have talked about attention to detail. They would have talked about extremely complex regulated paperwork. They would have talked about repetitive tasks. They would have talked about those things that are really relevant. All right. So I've got this thing, and you may have seen it before, but we'll call it a paint by numbers version of crafting a compelling career story of the future. And the way that this particular story got developed is that, like I said earlier, I mean, I've been making my living for a long time now because people get hired, and my teams, are involved with hires happening. So when hires happen, we get paid. And what we found was that, we wouldn't want to leave it up to people's resumes because most resumes don't tell stories very well. We didn't want to leave it up to people's resumes in terms of how we present individuals to hiring managers or to organizations or whatever you want to call it. And so over the time, I crafted this particular story. And this is the exact story and the exact framework of the story that if you were an individual I was working with and was presenting you to one of the hiring managers I'm working with, you would hear this story come out of my mouth. And the reason why this story comes out of my mouth is that over the years, I've honed it and honed it and honed it and honed it and worked on it so that the likelihood of my candidates getting hired goes up, because if that happens, then the likelihood of me getting paid goes up. And it's really about writing or telling the story in such a way that I want the hiring manager to retell it. I want the interviewer to retell it. And I want something that's really compelling and clear. So here we go. We're going to walk through it one step at a time. And it goes something like this. Step number one is I am a blank and a blank. The idea here is that, like in my case, I am a career consultant and a hiring and recruiting specialist, let's just say, right? If I were applying for a job that I saw online and that job happened to be director of recruiting, I would probably change one of these to director of recruiting. So if I was applying for a job online, one of these things would be the title from the job description. However, in the generic version of my resume, which, by the way, I'm not a big fan of you having multiple very different resumes. Multiple very different resumes is just a symptom of you hadn't decided what jobs make sense for you. I don't think it serves you well. We could argue about that all day, but I don't think it serves you well. But when you have your general version of what's going on, I suggest that you also avoid using specific titles that are going to imply level of seniority. As an example, if I said I am a director of recruiting and a recruiting team leader, and someone who is looking to hire an individual contributor as a executive recruiter would bypass me because they say, no, I'm not looking for a director of recruiting, right? I'm not looking for a team leader. I'm looking for an individual contributor to help us hire C-level executives. So despite the fact that I've got core strengths in that area, they would overlook me because of the level of seniority that I put in there. So in my generic compelling story, I probably wouldn't try to imply level. I would probably, for me, go something along the lines of, I am a recruiting specialist, right? I'm a recruiting specialist. I could even go so far as, if I was really narrowing it down to executive search, I could say I'm an executive recruiting specialist and a corporate hiring consultant. And so that way, if somebody was looking for a director of recruiting, they could see me as a director of recruiting. They could see me as an individual contributor. They could see me as what they need to see me as, because we have this thing called confirmation bias, which is we see what we want to see and we hear what we want to hear. And so as soon as I say I'm a director of recruiting, I've just eliminated a lot of possibilities for those companies that aren't looking to hire a director of recruiting. When I say I'm a senior, or I probably wouldn't even say senior, I'd probably say recruiting specialist, then I open up a lot more possibilities, but they're all in the same direction, right? They're all in the same general direction. Does that make sense? We good? All right. Hi, y'all. By the way, I started my first job, the way I worked myself through college was I worked at a place here in Austin. Some of you might know, it's called the Magic Time Machine. And I waited on tables. It was crazy. It was insane. It was as insane as, if you know the place, it was more insane than you know. And I was Tarzan. And so, until said time that there is a vaccination for coronavirus, I'm growing my beard, I'm growing my hair out. And if I have to, I'll go be Tarzan again. All right, so the statement here is, I am a blank and a blank. The next part of it is, with this thing that makes me unique, right? With this thing that makes me unique. And this is something that, if I said that I am a recruiting specialist and a corporate hiring consultant, I would go to, with unusually, with a lot of depth with respect to both software and semiconductor technology, right? That makes me stand out from not all recruiters. Some others could say the same thing, but it narrows the set down just a little bit. And depending upon who my audience is, I might adjust this thing that makes me a little bit unique. But what you can fill this in with are, relevant domain or industry experience, certifications, especially if you're in career transition, right? Certifications, if you've got a significant amount of expertise and proven discipline in an area, certifications matter less. Certifications are about reducing risk for the hiring organization, for the hiring manager. And so if you're in career transition, and I look at the set of all people who have certifications in this area and the set of all who don't, my risk is lower if I'm hiring somebody in career transition for those people who have certifications. So, I am a blank and a blank with these certifications, with this track record of achievement. And if none of those things apply, you can always go to, with this core motivation to make these kinds of things happen, right? So, all right. Next piece of this is this one. I help these kinds of businesses or these types of people, right? And the idea is that when you get to this part of the statement, I help these kinds of businesses or this kind of person, you want the person, the reader, or who you're speaking to essentially say, oh, you help people like me, you help people like us. So in my case, right, I'm a recruiting specialist and a corporate hiring consultant with significant experience in software product companies, or I might say SaaS software product companies. I'll narrow it down depending upon my audience. I help small to medium size SaaS companies with enterprise class clients and complex AI machine learning driven software, right? That's who I help. And so as soon as I say that, I just set myself apart from everybody else, not everybody, but the majority of other people who do what I do by specifically calling out who it is that I help. Now, in my generic version of my resume, or the generic version of my LinkedIn profile, or my generic version of where I'm talking about this, I would probably broaden it to say, I help small to medium technology companies. When it comes down to a particular target market or a particular target individual who I'm going after, I'm probably going to get it specific in terms of the types of companies they're at. As an example, right now, in the past 2 years, I've developed a significant pipeline and experience in retail technology companies that sell technology to multi-billion-dollar retailers. So I would probably narrow that down to, I help SaaS-based retail technology companies, and that's a set of a couple of hundred companies here in the United States, but it gets very clear and very specific. The idea is that you want someone to say, oh, you help people like me, and you want to make it relevant to the reader, relevant to the listener. If you can't come up with anything, you can always default to, I help organizations, I help teams, I help companies, right? All right, are we good? All right, jump in there if you got questions, comments, or anything. In fact, you can turn your mic on and
I've been
interject.
looking. We haven't had any questions yet, except for lots of people like your beard.
Okay, good. I appreciate that. I'm not sure that I like it. It's kind of weird and itchy to have hair on my face, but fur on my face. I'll show you something unique though. It's mustache dominant, right? I would have expected to be like beard dominant. It's kind of weird, right? I've never grown one before, but it's got this mustache dominant thing going through there. All right. So here's the next piece. I'm a blank and a blank with this thing that makes me unique. I help these kinds of businesses, or person type is, I help busy sales executives. I help IT leaders. I help, because it may be, and if you're, say, an administrative assistant or you're an executive assistant, I help busy executives, right? So it may, depending upon your role, it may make more or less sense to talk about the kinds of businesses that you help or the types of individuals or professionals who you help. And I help them solve problems like this, that, and another, right? I help them solve problems like this, that, and the other. And what I want this to be is not the task that you perform, but the result of the task that you perform. What's your business impact? Do you understand why it matters what you do, IT people are some of the worst in the sense that they say, well, I help image laptops or whatever it is. It's like, a company doesn't really want laptops imaged. They just want their users to be productive. And if they could do it without hiring you to image the laptop, they would. And so, the problems that you solve are never the tasks that you perform. It's always the problems that you solve are at least one level above the tasks that you perform, which is, as a result of the things that you do, something must be better, faster, cheaper, right? I mean, those are the only choices. You make money or you save time, or increase quality, which both of those are still money too. But there must be, the problems that you solve have to be above the level of the work that you do. The thing that will really help you in this regard is that far too few people seem to truly understand why they do what they do. They know what they do, but they don't necessarily articulate why it matters so much. So like in my case, I mean, the problems that I solve are, creating a high performance team, creating better products, creating more success of the company's future, ensuring that better decisions that are made. I mean, that's what my work does. Yeah, people end up getting hired, but so what did they get hired? I mean, a lot of people can help a company get hire people. My expertise is helping them hire high performance individuals who are therefore going to make better decisions, which are going to ensure the future success of the company and the employees and the shareholders and their customers, right? So you got to raise it to a level above the work that you do. All right. And essentially, the problems that you solve need to be the results that they really want and need. Because for almost all of us, if companies could hire as well without my help, I mean, they would never ask for my help. They would never pay for it. So nobody wants to pay me to help them. They would rather not, right? But the problems that I solve aren't really recruiting problems that I solve. They're more fundamental than that. They're bigger than that. And the same with you, regardless of the role that you play, the problems that you solve are at least one level above the tasks that you perform. All right. But now we'll get to the tasks that you perform, which is my strengths include, right? Or my expertise is in, or my skills are this, right? You can use whatever language you want, but we're going to get to that level now. My strengths include this, that, and the other, right? And you could have different, this is kind of your toolbox. This is your toolbox of skills and expertise and experience and those kinds of things. And depending upon who your audience is, you may select different components from that. So as an example, if I was going and talking to a SaaS software company in the retail space who does retail analytics and they're dealing with enterprise class customers, I know some things about them. So my strengths include, understanding a full SaaS technology stack, including real-time data ingestion, right, of hundreds of billions of data points. My strengths include, deep understanding of the motivations of technical individuals, as well as the ability to ensure that hiring managers and interview teams are doing the best job possible in selecting the most high performance individuals who are going to have the greatest impact on the success of the company, right? So those are my strengths, right? Those are my core strengths. So they're the things that I can do. So now it's about, I am a blank and a blank with this thing that makes me unique. I help these kinds of businesses and these kinds of people solve problems that include this, that, and the other. My strengths include this, that, and another one, right? And I can vary those. I can even add a bunch there if I have time for it, but this is where I get down to the level of the things that I can do and then turn, the skills that I've got. This final one, I am motivated to. And the best thing you can be motivated to do, and the thing that's most inspiring when I'm talking to somebody as a recruiter because my job really is to ensure that when I move somebody forward to have the conversation with the hiring manager or whoever it is that they're going to be talking to next, that it's not only a good use of their time, but that it's a high likelihood that the individual that I'm moving forward is going to be wildly successful in the role, and that it's going to really meet the motivations and the needs and the interest of the individual. Because, you know, if they're not really aligned with it and this work doesn't matter to them, why in the heck are they going to pull on the rope really, really hard? Because I want people who are going to join my clients' teams and they're going to align with them and they're going to pull on the rope really hard, which means I need to understand their root core motivations. And even if somebody who is interviewing you or looking at your resume doesn't realize that we all respond to people's root motivations. And if you're clear about what your drivers are and you're clear about what your motivations are, that's energizing to people. They like that. In fact, the more clear you can be about your role, about the roles that make sense for you, the problems that you love to solve, and the more clear you can be about why it matters to you, the more compelling and interesting you are. The opposite of that is needy, right? I need a job. I'm open to things. I got to pay my bills. I get it. I mean, there are times when it's hard not to feel needy, right? But what I'm here to tell you is that needy isn't pretty and it doesn't serve you well. And so this notion of what are your root motivators? Why does this work matter to you is the final thing that really sets you apart. Because what you're saying is, I am the person who can help you. I am an expert, or I am good at what it is that I do. I understand what business problems I'm solving and what skills and strengths I have to do it. And let me tell you why it matters to me, right? That's what this story does. That's what this story does. So when we put it all together, I guess I already did, but let me read, you know, that story that I told you at the beginning of this. I wrote this morning, and you know, if I had it to do over again, and when I'm presenting when I'm presenting a candidate to someone, this is what I'll do, right? And I couldn't find the email message that I sent. It was a long time ago. But I'm sure that it went something like this. And keep in mind, this is the person, they were in the military. They went into welding. They got into TIG welding because they were really good at welding. They put them on aircraft mechanics, in particular, welding things on wings of some of these super high performance fighter aircraft, as well as the blades or what have you that they call them on helicopters. Some of those things are really complex, right? And then they went into QA and manufacturing, and they were applying for a software job. And along the way, they really used some complex software to do it all. And so here's their story as I wrote it just a while ago. I got to move my mic out of the way. I'm a quality assurance professional with a software and software specialist with a track record of 99.9% compliance with highly regulated and in highly regulated environments. I help software and technology teams ensure that QA tests are accurate, quality is never compromised, and the results are thoroughly documented according to regulations. My strengths include relentless attention to detail, thorough and complete testing of repetitive tasks, and the ability to quickly learn and adapt to new software and testing tools. I thrive in an environment where complex QA ensures the success of my team, our company, and our clients and end users. I think that had this individual had that as the summary of their resume, and had that been the compelling story, that the hiring manager would have instantaneously said, yes, I want to talk to this person, because, you know, I had presented them that way. They skipped my writing in the first place. They went straight to the resume. The hiring manager essentially called me and said, Gary, what is it about a software QA professional that you don't understand? And so basically I had to push back and say, what is it about this professional that you don't understand? And the truth is that it was just the case that most people are their own worst enemy with regard to telling their compelling story. So this is the way that I present you. This is the story that I put together. This is the way that I put together. And what I would love is if you went into an interview, and following that interview, somebody, you know, let's say you interviewed with Sally, and later that day, somebody says, hey, Sally, you had an interview this morning. Tell me about that. What I want Sally to say is this, right? So, yeah, so, you know, this fits for all kinds of things. If somebody says, so tell me about yourself, tell this story, right? This is the compelling story that you really want to tell. So that's what I had to hear. That's what I had to tell you. I hope that this is useful and valuable to you. I've used this story 5,000 times probably in one way, shape, or form. it's not to be used exactly like it is. It's kind of paint by numbers. And what I mean by paint by numbers is that the first time you do it a little bit rough, and then try it again, iterate over it until it gets to the point where it rattles off your tongue, in the sense of, I am a blank and I blank with this thing that makes me unique. I help these kinds of people and these kinds of organizations solve their problems that include this one, that one, the other. I do that because I have real strengths and skills and expertise in these kinds of things, like this one, that one, and the other one. And my current situation is one that I'm highly motivated to make these kinds of things happen, which the kind of things you really want to talk about your motivation, which is the success of others, right? The success of others is the best story that you can possibly tell, because by telling a compelling story about how you're motivated to create success for others, you become more interesting, you become more attractive, and the likelihood of me getting paid goes up. So that's what I've got to say about that. What do you think, Kathy?
I think it's great.
All
Uh,
right.
it was it was formulaic, which is nice, but it didn't necessarily sound like that. And it because it does sound like a story,
Yeah.
and so that's the whole point, is that
Yeah.
it kind of flows.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the trick is to analyze yourself and see if you can really identify all of those things.
Yeah.
We're very locked into, here are my duties, here are rather than the big picture of what does that how does that make a difference.
Kathy, I
Yeah.
was thinking those books that you used to fill in adjectives and whatnot, and they make a story. Back when we filled in those paper books, I can't think of the name of them. Somebody in
Yeah.
chat
Mad
help me out.
Libs.
Mad Libs. There you go.
Right.
This is Mad Libs for resume writing.
Yeah. The other thing I do want to add, though, if I go back to this slide, can you still see my slide?
Yes.
All right. So what I just shared is that your compelling story is grounded in today, right? It's grounded in today. And it's about projecting out into the future and painting a picture. The better I can paint a picture in your mind of me being successful on your team, the more likely it is that you're going to like me, want me. You're kind of going, oh my God, right? I need your help now. And you just turn the corner to where they're very interested in you, right? So what I talk to you about is grounded in today. Once you get clear on the role that makes sense for you, then you can tell that compelling story. And by the way, if you're in career transition, and I work with the people I work with most during career transition or transitioning in IT roles. So I just use that as an example. But so many of them have trouble telling the story because they say, well, I'm not an IT person. I'm not an IT professional yet. And so they want to say, well, I'm a nurse transitioning into IT or what have you. And all I can tell you is that as a recruiter, I'm not hiring a nurse transitioning into IT. I'm hiring an IT professional. And the truth of the matter is, if you're transitioning into being an IT, if you're transitioning into being XYZ, let's just say something, whatever you're transitioning into, until said time that you can look me in the eye and tell me that you're confident that you're going to be great at what it is that you're doing, why in the world should I hire you, right? Why? It doesn't make any sense. And what people tell me all the time is, well, if they just give me a chance. It's just like, having done this as a living forever, I mean, why would we give you a chance? I mean, what you're asking for when you're asking me to give you a chance, especially, let's say it's my business, right? I've run businesses for a long time now. And you ask me to give you a chance, is what you're saying is, please, Gary, open your wallet and hand me cash on the hopes that things are going to work out well. So if you're in career transition, until you can look me in the eye and tell me you are an IT professional, or tell me that you are, I'm not expecting you to be senior. I expect you to be junior, right? Entry level even. But until you can look me in the eye and tell me that you are, why would I hire you? And the fact that you're in transition, the fact that you used to be a nurse and now you're moving in IT kind of doesn't matter to me. So it's all about being grounded in today. Once you're grounded in today, you know where it is you're going. You can tell the compelling story and say, wow, okay, that's really awesome. Now what you could do with that power is now go back over your career history and pull out those things that you did in the past, that not the task you performed necessarily, like in the case of that individual who did welding. Don't talk about welding, you're going into software. Nobody cares about welding. But what they could talk about is attention to detail, filling out forms, government compliance, right? They could talk about repetitive tasks. They could talk about zero error rates. They could talk about all kinds of things that are very relevant to moving into software. software. You just need to not talk about the details of what they used to do, because if you're in career transition, or even if you're not, the details of what you used to do in the past are really boring. You know, the broad brushstrokes of who you are and why things matter and what you learned, and you know how it aligns with where you're going, that's what's cool. And if you don't do that, you're leaving it as an exercise for somebody else to do, and you're asking them too much. They can't do it, right? They can't
Gary,
do it.
I
Yeah.
missed, I missed
We've
one
got a
word.
couple questions, but I also wanted to say that we did a resume once for somebody who had only worked in fast food, and we were able to do a resume or give him talking points so that he got a job in manufacturing,
Yeah.
because parts is parts, essentially.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so we have a couple questions. So one guy says, this seems pretty easy, but he says, what if I'm transitioning back to a similar role after 3 years of caring for parents? So apparently that gap in his work history has been a barrier. So you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a gap in your work history is always a barrier because it makes you higher risk than those people who don't have the gap, right? You know, the notion is that if you're in a competitive marketplace, and right now jobs that are open and posted somewhere is a competitive environment. It always is, but it's especially competitive right now, because how competitive it is a function of the number of people who are currently actively seeking employment versus the number of opportunities. So yeah, that's what's tough about that, right? Um, you know, I think that the better job you can do of your competitors, your competitors who don't have that gap, are not going to be telling the compelling story this way. They're not going to be talking about the root motivations, right? The thing that you've got that can set you apart from the others is, there's a couple of things. One is, do you understand the value of what it is that you do? And can you talk in terms that the hiring manager's responsibilities are generally a level or two above what it is? So talk about it in ways that are going to matter to the hiring manager. Why are they going to hire you? Why do they need you to do those things? And talk about the results that you're going to create as one, because all your other competitors, so to speak, are probably not going to do that. And then number two is, honestly, your root motivation. I remember one of my best hires I ever made in my life was a person who their only response to my outreach was to them. It was about a Unix. It was about a really complex Unix administrator position. Their reply to me was, I eat Unix for breakfast and I'll work like a dog to do everything that's necessary to make the team successful. And I was just like, dang, okay, let's go, let's talk, right? Now, maybe everybody wouldn't respond quite to that, so I'm not quite sure that I'd go all the way to that point. But my point is that someone seeing you, understanding the results that you create, and see you champing at the bit to go do it, will set you apart, right? So you got to overcome that gap in some way, and that's what I think. The final thing that I think about that is, if your primary job search strategy is replying to open jobs, then you're going to be in a highly competitive space. And chances are that if what you do is even reasonably common, there's going to be somebody in line with you who doesn't have that gap. So you have to overcome it with your compelling story. And even if you can overcome it with your compelling story, anytime you're in a competitive situation, statistically, there's going to be somebody who's better, faster, cheaper than you are. And so your best bet to execute an effective job search is to find the individuals who hire people to solve the problems that you solve, reach out to them and build a relationship with them prior to there ever being a job open. And in so many different jobs, you know, turnover, people leave those jobs about once every 2.5, 3 years. And so when you look at the statistics of the number of hiring managers and how long they know ahead of time, you know, a lot of hiring managers already know months in advance when they're going to bring somebody on board, and there isn't a line yet. So go find them, go reach out to them. The hiring managers who know that they're going to need to hire somebody, they'll respond to you when there's a line of 0, right? So that's your number one thing.
So here's another question, and it seems as though this was kind of the point of your entire presentation, but it says, that seems unrealistic. You can't get a job without experience, and you can't get experience without a job. How else does one transition if no one will take a chance on you? What about transferable skills and general work experience?
Well, sure. I mean, but what has to happen is that if what you're telling me is, hey, I'm a nurse and I know all about nursing, and let me tell you about phlebotomy and how to give shots that don't hurt and how to dress people and how to roll them over on bed so they don't get bed sores, and I'm transitioning at IT, please give me a chance. I'm not giving you a chance. I mean, why would I do that, right? If what you're telling me instead is, hey, I'm an entry-level IT professional, I have these kinds of certifications, you know, when I was, you know, I've always been the go-to person, not only my family at work with respect to computer related issues. I spent time in hospitals and spent the majority of time on computers. I understand how important it was, not only patient care, but to the success of our business, right? Now you're telling me a story that I go, oh, that makes sense. So every single person who's ever started in any role in anything once had never done it before. So we've all already made that leap before, right? We've all done it. My point is, though, if you tell a compelling story about why I should believe that you're going to be successful in doing the thing that you're telling me you're going to be doing, that you want to do for me or with me, then yeah, let's talk about that. If you focus on saying, well, I don't have experience yet, and I used to be this other kind of stuff. If you focus on your past instead of your future, then it's too big of an ask. You're asking me to make a leap that I can't possibly make, right? So the exact same people in the exact same situation telling their story differently makes all the difference in the world. I mean, the story I was telling you in this one, which is a welder applied for a software QA job. Are you kidding me? Why would anybody give a welder a chance at a software QA job? Well, they wouldn't. But the person wasn't a welder. The person's a QA professional. They have a lot of attention to detail. They understand how to fill out really complex government forms. They're able to do repetitive tasks. So presenting himself as a welder was the wrong way to present himself. So it's really about how you tell your story, right? People do it in such a way so that you're not asking somebody to take a chance. Do it in such a way that you're telling people that you're going to do everything that it takes to be successful and why you want to do it and why you're motivated to do it. And then they no longer have to feel like they're giving you a chance. Now they have to feel like, oh, whoa, I need to bring you on board because you're going to help me. So I think what it comes down to is step number one is decide where you're going to the degree that you feel like you got to be open to opportunities that works against you. There would be very, very few that I would, after a deep conversation, would agree that trying to pursue multiple things is better. It's almost never better. So one, decide. And then two, craft your compelling story based in today and paint the picture of your success going forward using, something like this little script that I gave you. And then go back to your work history, align your work history with this, talk about the things that were relevant in your past, right? And align it so that if your background is disjoint, right, like mine is, if it's like that, you got to do this, right? Smooth it out, smooth out the curves. I could even explain to you why my job as Tarzan at the Magic Time Machine is informative to my ability to be a recruiter, and it is, quite frankly. Yeah.
Okay, we would like to hear that, please.
Well, I learned so many things. I learned that I can't judge a book by its cover. I learned that, I learned customer service skills. I mean, I was in front of thousands of people for years. I learned that if I oversold how much food and how much money they really wanted to spend, it came out of my tip, right? And I learned that probably the hardest lesson that I learned was I tried to judge some tables in advance as to which ones were going to give me the bigger tip when I was early stage. And I still feel bad about, there was a family who had clearly probably had to save up money to be able to come. It wasn't an expensive restaurant. I did a decent job with them, but I paid a lot more attention to some of the tables, and they left me one of the biggest tips I'd ever got. And so to this day, that still feel bad about that, right? So I can't judge a book by its cover. I can't possibly tell whether somebody's a good fit for a job based upon looking at their resume. And if you are one of those people that thinks by giving somebody personality tests or any of the kind of tests that are out there and the insights and all that kind of stuff, those are totally parlor games, by the way. So yeah, you just can't, right? All the things that are important about somebody and are going to make them work really hard and be successful on your team, you cannot see on their resume. And you certainly can't see in any of these silly tests that companies are making people take these days.